The scripture that Brent just sang to us is found in 2 Chronicles chapter 7. The occasion is the dedication of the temple, actually just after the dedication of the temple. They dedicated this magnificent edifice that Solomon built for God, that David wanted to build, and came to be conceptualized and decided, let's build this thing, and God says, no, you will not. Your son may build it, but you may not. It had been built, and it must have been, certainly by their standards of those days, something incredible to see. They had rejoiced. They had celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days, and then the 8th day they'd celebrated more. And, of course, there had been the great prayer by Solomon at the dedication of the temple. And finally, on the 23rd day, Solomon sent everybody home, happy, singing to themselves, rejoicing, so full of the experience of just seeing God's house, being there on this occasion, and being able to sing his praises and do all the things they did at the Feast of Tabernacles. God loved Solomon, and he's one of the few men in history that God ever appeared to and spoke to personally rather than through an intermediary. And on the night after they had sent him by night and said to him, I have heard your prayer, and I have chosen this place for myself for a house of sacrifice. So however God may have felt about the idea to start with, but when David said, I want to build a house for God, he said, look, I've been in tents all these years. God replied, I never said anything. It never entered my mind. It wasn't my idea. I didn't want a house. And so you're not going to build it. Solomon, your son, will. But he has now said, I affirm it. I accept it. It is mine. It will be forever for a house of sacrifice for me. And then he says this, if I shut up heaven that there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people. And of course, the unspoken statement is that there would be a reason or God would not do anything like that. And then he says this, if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. He goes on to say something else, I think, important. He says, now my eyes shall be open and my ears attent to the prayer that is made in this place. For now have I chosen and sanctified this house, that my name may be there forever, and that my eyes and my heart shall be there perpetually. What a statement. Now, if you ever wondered why the continued dedication to the temple was precepts for the Jewish people, and also by the apostles in the early church, this ought to give you the answer. Do you understand? They regularly went up to the temple at the hour of prayer. Well, why would they do that? They could pray anywhere, right? Well, yes, you can pray anywhere, but God had said, my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to the prayer that is made in this place. I'll tell you for sure, if you'd been in Jerusalem, you'd have gone to the temple at the hour of prayer with that kind of promise coming from God. I'll hear the prayer that is made in this place. They can pray anywhere, but this house was special. And it's special in some very important ways. I'll come back here to 2 Chronicles in a moment, but for right now, Isaiah 56, verse 6 comes to mind. Also the sons of the strangers that join themselves to the Lord to serve him and to love the name of the Lord to be his servant, everyone that keeps the Sabbath from polluting it and takes hold of my covenant. I want you to think about what you just heard. The son of the stranger. We're not talking about Ephraimites, Manassites, Gideon. We're not talking about Jews. We're not talking about Israelites here. We're talking about Gentiles. If the son of the stranger that joined themselves to the eternal, to serve him, to love the name of Jehovah, everyone that keeps the Sabbath from polluting it and takes hold of my covenant. So it's possible for a Gentile to take hold of God's covenant. To every one of them, I will bring to my holy mountain, I will make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon my altar. For my house shall be a house of prayer for all people. What a profound statement Isaiah has made here. The house of God is not merely the Jewish property. It doesn't just belong to the Israelites. It's a house of prayer for all people. And yet the day that Jesus came there, the day that he overturned the money changers' temple, took a little cord of which whacked some goats across the rear end and sent them charging through the whole thing. He said, this has been said, my house shall be a house of prayer, and you have made it a den of thieves. The recognition of this
is a house of prayer for all people, not just for Jews, but for everyone. If you've ever wondered the dedication of the Jews to the Wailing Wall at Jerusalem, this prayer, this answer that God gave to Solomon, really ought to help. That wall that they go to, they stick little prayers in the cracks of the wall, and they stand there bowing before that wall repeatedly as some people say, they actually in their private prayers pronounce the name of God, and they bow when they do so, lest they should profane His name in some way. Their dedication to this place is based upon this statement: my eyes will be open to this house, and my ears attentive to the prayer that is made in this place. And so they come as close as they can to pray in this place. God said, my eyes shall be open, my ears shall be open to the prayer that is made in this place. It is singularly hateful that the Muslims have denied full access to the Temple Mount to the Jews who would come there to pray. For all these years, all these generations, these centuries, when you know what is in their heart, and the promise that was made to them about praying, and how God will always hear the prayers that were made in that place, they cannot go up on the Temple Mount regularly and pray. They have to go down in this hole by the Wailing Wall and pray there and stick their little prayers and little pieces of paper in the cracks in the Wailing Wall. But the subject of today's message is not so much that. It is this verse: if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven, I'll forgive their sin, I will heal their land. And you would think that this little short verse, this little promise, would ring in the ears of everyone who sees the sores, who sees the wounds and the bruises that we see in our nation at large, and the very real need for healing of our people. That this little verse would ring in our ears and would tell us what we need to do. And you know, after 9/11, after those airplanes crashed into the World Trade Center buildings and brought them down, the great loss of life, there was a response that was something like that. I think a lot of people in this country humbled themselves and prayed and sought God's face. Maybe some even turned from their wicked ways. I don't know. But it soon became unpatriotic to argue that the events of 9/11 were brought upon ourselves by the things that we had done. And so I think most of the voices that were saying this and were warning and were cautioning became much quieter after that period of time. Now, I never felt that we brought the events of 9/11 on ourselves by our foreign policy. I never felt that it's because of our support for Israel. I never felt that it's because of the way we had dealt with the Arab countries. I never felt that. I never imagined it for even a moment. But I did feel that we have opened the door on evil in this land by the systematic removal of God from our public life. And I still do. I still very firmly believe that we need as a people to humble ourselves and pray and seek His face and turn from our wicked ways, because there is plenty of that to go around this country. We are headed into ever more dangerous waters all the time. And not just because of the impending war on Iraq. The war on Iraq is a necessary evil. Our country, our government can no more ignore Iraq and what Iraq is doing and can do and might do than it can ignore a burglar breaking into your house at night or somebody who shot his wife down in the public square and walked away from it, last Saturday. They can't ignore what people do. They can't ignore criminals in the world. Our government alone, our nation alone could probably squash Saddam Hussein and Baghdad and all of the evil forces there like cockroaches, so many cockroaches on the kitchen floor. The power is there to do it. But the problem that's beginning to develop is that the world is dividing into two camps. What Islam calls the zone of Islam and the zone of war. I don't know if you've ever heard that expression before, but Islamic thinkers and Islamic thought divides the world into two divisions. Actually, a little more than that. They have a third one, but that third one doesn't seem to amount to much anymore. It's disappeared between the two big ones. And the two big ones are the zone of Islam, the zone of war. And the zone of war is everywhere else. You and I live today in the zone of war. The Australians live in the zone of war. The Canadians live in the zone of war. The British live in the zone of war. The Germans, the Lithuanians, the Russians, all live in the zone of war. And slowly but surely, the awareness of this is beginning to dawn on what we call the Western world, what I would call, frankly, the civilized world, is beginning nowadays to finally begin to understand some of the things that are coming down the pipe toward us. Not going after Iraq at this particular time would actually, if anything, hasten the end of things, hasten the climax of some of the things that are coming to pass. So going after Iraq is necessary. I don't think there's any question about it. But while the government pursues the necessary war, while the government tracks down the cockroaches in their little dark places around the world and does whatever it has to do, there's important business for us to consider right here, right now, and it's subsumed in this one little verse. If my people, who are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and will heal their land. There are 4 things to do. One is to humble ourselves, to get off our high horse, to stop patting ourselves on the back, to stop being pleased with ourselves, to take ourselves down a notch before God. One of the ways sometimes that is done is by fasting, but fasting is really a physical thing. The main thing is what goes on in the heart is what counts. Because in Isaiah 58, God says your fasting is wasted. And nothing, why have you fasted, we say, and you don't hear us anymore. And God says, because you're fasting for the wrong things and the wrong reasons. You fast, you abstain from food, but nothing in your heart, nothing in your mind changes. What is needed is the bowing of the head and the body of man, a bowing of the soul of man before God, and an acknowledgement of His greatness in that way. That is one thing. Second is pray. And that, of course, involves petitioning God. To petition God, you have got to recognize God. You have got to accept Him as God. He's got to mean something to you. To pray. To seek His face. That's an interesting little expression. I think most people would understand what you mean by seek God's face. But somehow or other, every time I see this and I think of it, the illustration that comes to mind is a time I was visiting a woman as a minister. I was in her home. We were sitting there talking about the various things that she wanted to know. She had a number of questions she wanted to ask me, and we were trying to answer the questions. But she had a kid who was needing attention, wanting attention very badly. And he kept kind of, provoking his mom one way or another. He would pull on her skirt. He would speak to her while she was sort of ignoring, hush. And I don't know how sometimes mothers do this, but they are able to absolutely shut a kid out and carry on the conversation as though he wasn't there, while the person talking to them is going crazy. That was me. I couldn't figure out what. But finally, the kid crawled up into her lap because she was ignoring him and kept trying to get her attention, and she would just, sort of put a hand down, and he'd put his hand up, she'd put her hand down. And finally, he reached up, put his hand on her face, and pulled her face around to look at it. This is the image that always comes to mind to me when it says, if you will seek my face. You want my attention. If you will seek my attention, you'll seek my face. Do this. And then finally, and this is not the least, turn from your wicked ways. Now, I dare say that most of us as Christians don't feel like we have just an awful lot of wicked ways in our lives. But sometime you might take a moment to go back and read the 9th chapter of Daniel, that long prayer of Daniel's where he cries out to God for Israel because of their sins. And throughout that prayer, Daniel says, we have sinned. We have sinned grievously. We have turned our back on God. We have done very wickedly before you. And the realization that we are part and parcel of a society that has done wickedness, is doing wickedness, and is carrying on with wickedness every day. And to some extent, to whatever extent, whatever degree, you and I tolerate that wickedness. That we don't stand up against that wickedness. We don't speak out about that wickedness. That we're a part of it. That we are a part and parcel with it. It's a hard thing to get your mind around, but there's a scripture, for example, says, you saw a thief and consented with him. What does that mean? So you're walking through the store, you see somebody take a sweater off the rack and stick it under his coat and go walking out the door with it, and you say nothing. You have consented with a thief. In a sense, you are what the law calls an accessory after the fact. The Bible would hold you guilty of theft yourself because of not giving testimony against the person who has stolen something in that situation. Now, this is only one illustration. But there are many ways in our society in which you and I are participants in the wickedness, if we are not direct practitioners of wickedness. And so there is a change that needs to go on in the world around us, and you and I really need to be agents of that change. We don't have to be, hostile. We don't have to be angrily provocative. But like a grain of sand in an oyster is an irritant. Like anyone who asks a question, anyone who will say, why are you doing that? Why would you even think of that? The questions that can be asked and answered in those situations can oftentimes make a difference in a person if you just will say, why are you doing that? Not long ago I read a book titled America's Real War by Rabbi Daniel Lapin. And it was a shocking book in a lot of ways because he laid out his credentials as a Jewish rabbi. He was a Jewish rabbi, an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, the son of an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. And goes out talking about uncles who are rabbis and all the different people in his position in Judaism and how he feels. And he made it very, very clear. He has never been a Christian, is not a Christian, and could never be a Christian. At the same time says that he feels that his life, his future, everything he lives for is bound up and depends on the fact that the United States of America remain a Christian nation. I want you to think about that. This was very important to him that the United States remain a Christian nation. I didn't realize until I read the book, but the book is really written for Jews. It's really written to impress upon Jewish people the fact that the Judeo-Christian morality of this country, the basis upon which the country was originally founded, upon which it was built, the legal systems in which that we live by every day of our lives, all grew out of a Judeo-Christian background, and consequently, in our origins, we really were a Christian nation. And we have for a long time now, as a people, been trying consistently to distance ourselves from that Christianity and from that Judeo-Christian background. Even to the point of saying we've got to uproot and move off, a monument on a courthouse lawn that has the Ten Commandments on it. I mean, people are getting a little bit crazy in this country, and somebody somewhere is going to have to stand up and argue with those people and try to persuade them that they are wrong and wrong-headed in their approach on these things. But there's a way to do this, and there's a way not to do it. It became very clear to me as I was reading through his book. He talked about the anti-God forces in our society, and they are very powerful. He defines them in some detail. As I read what he was talking about there, and the war between those who believe in God and those who are against, or anti-God, essentially, I began to realize that there is no way to fight this war on any level other than person to person. This battle will not be won by politics, it will not be won by laws, it will not be won by government. You can't put the right man in office and win this war. That's not where it's going to be fought. Attempting to enforce Christian values by government only scares the daylights out of people and actually plays into the enemy's hands. It can only be won by converting people, one person at a time. By persuading people, one person at a time. By arguing the case, one person at a time. By changing the hearts of people, one person at a time. That's where the changes have got to be made. And until those changes are made, unless they're made, this battle will ultimately be lost. The key to this change is this simple passage. If my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then I will hear from heaven, will forgive their sin, and will heal their land. It doesn't require us to climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every byway. It doesn't require superhuman efforts. It just requires a turning of the heart and the seeking the face of God. That's where it starts. And to some extent, the conversion of society, one person at a time, is a simple matter of persuasion at the margins. I want to explain to you what I mean by that, and I hope you'll listen very carefully, because this is something which oftentimes gets lost in the process. One great example of what's happening around the country now, which I would call persuasion at the margins, is what's called crisis pregnancy centers. I've never heard of these things. I hadn't heard the last really couple of weeks. I found that they're sprouting up like weeds all over the country. I say like weeds, they're not weeds. It's a very good thing to be happening in our society. Where I found out about it was because the woman running for Attorney General in the state of Illinois was talking about it, ran on the platform of, according to the source I was reading, shutting down the crisis pregnancy centers in Illinois. And so I thought, what are these evil things? And I got my handy-dandy computer out and got on the internet and went chasing around looking for crisis pregnancy centers to find out what they did, what they are. They are basically Christian in their orientation. It's a broad-based approach to religion, not sectarian in any way. They provide information, education, and support to pregnant women who are in trouble. Very simple. They run ads all over the place. They offer free pregnancy tests. They offer counseling. They offer all, they just service. They give free blankets, clothes for baby clothes, and things like this to poor women who are looking, who are having a baby and who are frightened about having one. They do not provide abortion. They do not advise abortion. One of the reasons for their existence is that they can get young women in a position where they can talk to them and persuade them not to kill their baby. That's what they're there for. And to give them the support they need when they don't do it. Because a lot of times the fear of simple things like clothes and blankets could be a major factor involved in getting rid of the decision to get rid of the terminated pregnancy. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I can support the child. And so the help is given to actually help them through this period of time, to put the baby up for adoption if that's what needs to happen, so that the child does not have to be killed. It is, in the main, an act of persuasion and moral support and some physical support to women who are doing this. And I ask myself, why would anyone want to shut this down? Well, what has happened in the state of New York is an interesting case. They were citing the New York Attorney General who was, quote, shutting down. Well, it turns out that's not what the New York Attorney General is doing at all. What he has done is get a consent order from some of the crisis pregnancy centers to be more careful in their advertising, to not imply things in their advertising that they don't do, to not imply that they might offer abortions, as an alternative when their real goal is to get people in to talk about not having an abortion. And so, consequently, they got a consent order. But the crisis pregnancy center that joined in the order were quite happy to do so because they felt the Attorney General just helped them clean up a few loose ends, and what they were doing was fine. They were going to be able to continue on. And I don't have any idea what's going to happen in Illinois with that Attorney General, but one really wonders at the rhetoric, and it was very strong rhetoric anti these crisis pregnancy centers that I was hearing, when the obvious objective of the crisis pregnancy centers is persuasion. It's the persuasion of young women not to have an abortion, but to bring the baby to full birth, to keep the child or give the child up for adoption, and to save that child's life. To try to do this, I thought was a very good thing. So I felt, in looking at that as a good example, that persuasion lies at the core of the best evangelistic efforts. Persuasion that life is worth saving, even at the beginning and even at the bitter end. That you don't just cut off people's life support because they're getting a little bit old and a little bit expensive. That our respect for life causes us to preserve life at the very, very beginning and also at the very, very end. Persuasion that abstinence from sex until marriage is the best way for a young girl to go and to persuade her of the harm and the dangers of going the other way. Persuasion that parents should teach their children about God and do their best to overcome the pernicious effects of a godless educational system. And I don't, it may sound pejorative to call our educational center godless, but isn't it? Isn't it? Can you go into our education and teach system, public schools, and teach kids about God? Can you teach them that the earth around them and the trees that they see and all this was created and designed by God? No, our educational system, our public educational system is and must remain godless because of the interpretation of our Constitution imposed by the Supreme Court. So that's where we are. So we are on our job. We're not going to be able to do much about that at the core. Our job is on the margins. It is to persuade parents to fill in those gaps in their children's education and lives that the school system is leaving. Persuasion that God exists, that He is the creator of all things, and He is the guarantor of our freedoms. Persuasion that God has spoken to man at various times. Persuasion that the Bible is true, and that living by the Bible is the way to live a good life, a clean life, a healthy life, a better life, and a way ultimately to come to know God. The way to the war to save this country can only be won one person at a time, and it will not be won by sectarian Christianity. Because sectarian Christianity just involves itself, moves people from one war to another war. The fact of the matter is, you don't start evangelism with your sectarian views. All that does is move people from one warring camp into another warring camp. You start with a simple faith in a real God. That's all. That's where you start. A creator, the one who made us all, the one who guarantees our freedom, the one who created man and all, designed everything around us, and who can be known by his creation, who can be understood by his creation, and so many things that we can learn from him. If God wants a person to be in our church, he will bring them here. We need to do our best to bring people to God and to the Bible so that he can take them here if that's where he wants them to be. But our job is not to persuade them of our particular little quirk. Not that we wouldn't answer questions about our particular beliefs and our things that we believe that set us apart from others. We certainly do that. But that's not where we start with people who are in trouble. You start with God. You start with Jesus Christ. You start with the Creator. You start with truth. And let God take them from there. I remember Sam Bakiopi's comment once that he learned how to persuade people about the Sabbath from selling encyclopedias door to door. He went selling encyclopedias back when he was in college, I guess, selling encyclopedias door to door. And he realized that as he went in, he had to sell the encyclopedia by selling the benefits of owning one. And his argument is, when it comes to the Sabbath, you don't scare people into keeping the Sabbath. You sell the benefits of keeping the Sabbath. Now, I want you to consider with me for a little bit today the benefits that we have to sell. This is important. This is something I think anybody would really want to understand. And it's found in the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy, verse 1. It shall come to pass, if you will hearken diligently to the voice of the Lord your God, to observe to do all his commandments which I command you this day, that the Lord your God will set you on high above all the nations of the earth. Okay, what's our foreign policy going to be? How are we going to manipulate affairs? How are we going to carry out our policy in relation to other nations so that we're on top of the whole heap? Well, here's how it starts. You hearken diligently to the voice of the Lord your God to observe to do all of his commandments. What's the result? You will be set on high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come on you and overtake you if you will hearken to the voice of the Lord your God. What? What are they? Blessed shall you be in the city. Blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body and the fruit of the ground, the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your kind and of your flocks of sheep. Blessed in the city. Are we really blessed in our cities right now? We're blinded to them. Blessed shall you be in the field. Well, we sure have been in years gone by. The United States alone can produce enough food to feed the entire world. We don't. We could. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body. And of course, I'm afraid for many people nowadays, the fruit of their body is a curse that they want to get rid of. And so, what is it now? Approaching 35 million abortions since Roe v. Wade came into effect. I've likened that to wiping out the population of the whole, southeastern corner of the United States. All of it. Just take them, kill all the people in them, you kill about the same number of lives that have been taken in abortion. And of course, what nobody seems to understand is that one of the reasons why we're headed into a terrible Social Security crisis is because all those dead fetuses will not be here paying Social Security to support the older generation that had the abortions. It's one of the things what goes around comes around. Blessed shall be your basket and your store. Blessed shall you be when you come in. Blessed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will cause your enemies that rise up against you to be smitten before your face. They will come out against you one way, and they will flee 7 ways. And the way in which the United States has been blessed as far as our war-making potential, our military, our ability not only to protect ourselves, but also to protect our friends around the world is phenomenal. We have been blessed in that way. The Lord shall command blessing upon you in your storehouses, and all you set your hand to, he shall bless you in the land which the Lord your God gives you. The Lord shall establish you a holy people to himself as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God to walk in his ways. And all the people of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they will be afraid of you. Now I want you to think about this whole segment here for just a minute. Because this is the blessings that we have to sell. This is the program. Keep the commandments of God, Maintain God as our God. Recognize Him as our God. And these are the things that will come our way. Now here we are, 230 or 40 years as a nation that we've been here in this country? Going all the way back to 1776. We have been blessed. These things have actually been fulfilled in this country. And it kind of leads me to think that and no one would argue that the doctrinaire beliefs of the founding fathers, that the doctrinal positions of the early, all the churches in this country, which differ with each other on many, many items. You have Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, Seventh-day Baptist. You've got all these different sects, denominations, and so forth. But throughout all of that, there is a common fundamental acceptance of the God of the Bible and of Jesus Christ. And the acceptance of the fundamentals of the way of life that have been a part of this country. As bad, perhaps, as we have done, as poorly as we have done, it was enough to produce the blessings that you and I enjoy to this day. God actually is not quite as particular as we sometimes would want to pay Him when we're distancing ourselves from someone who doesn't see things quite like we do. The blessings of God can come without you getting every single, dotting every I and crossing every T and getting everything perfectly right. The United States of America is clear witness that this is true in the world today. There's also a stunning statement in here I thought was interesting. He said, all the people of the earth shall see that you were called by the name of Jehovah, or Yahweh, and they will be afraid of you. Did you notice that phrase? Because what do you mean by that, you suppose? Because Israel was never called Yahweh. That was not their name. They weren't known by that name. So when he says the world will see that you are called by the name of the Lord and be afraid of you, what do you mean? The English reader is apt to misuse or misunderstand the word name. For us, it's a phonetic appellation. I'm Ronald Dark, and it doesn't mean anything besides, in the minds of a person who might hear the name if they happen to know me, that this right here is what that brings to mind, and not much of anything else, what I am. But really to call your God Yahweh doesn't cut any ice either, because there were any number of Yahwehs in Canaan when Israel got there. Some of them even had consorts. One of them at least had a consort. Yahweh had a consort. They have little statues of Yahweh as consort that had been dug up by archaeologists in Canaan. So that name was used by or applied to gods in Canaan before I think even Israel arrived in the land. Now consider again what this passage says. Will cause people who don't even, it says it will cause people who don't even speak your language to see, not hear, see that you are called by the name of Yahweh. And to be called by the name of Yahweh then is really to be identified with Him. That you are identified with Yahweh. Now it says, it shall come to pass, if you shall hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord your God, to observe to do all His commandments which I command you this day, the Lord your God will set you on high above the nations, and all these blessings will come upon you if you shall listen to the voice of Yahweh your God. In other words, because you have taken the commandments of Jehovah, because you have taken listen to the voice of Jehovah, the result of all these blessings which we read and listed off in your life will cause people to see that you are identified with Jehovah and not some other God, which is not blessed in the same way that you do. It has nothing to do with words. It has to do with the way you live your life. That you live as one who hearkens diligently to the words and the voice of Jehovah. Continuing verse 11 now, Deuteronomy. The Lord shall make you plenteous in goods, the fruit of your body, the fruit of your cattle, the fruit of your ground, in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. The Lord shall open to you His good treasure, the heaven to give the rain into the land in His season, to bless all the work of your hand, and you shall lend to many nations. You shall lend and not borrow. And boy, we have done that. We have lent money all over the country, all over the world. Now, many people look at our national debt and say, well, we're borrowing a lot of money. Most of that money, virtually all of it, we're borrowing from one another. It's the national debt. Most of it is held by Americans. The Lord shall make you the head and not the tail. And who is the head right now? Who is it that's leading the United Nations? Who is it that's leading NATO? Who is it that's leading the free world and actually has the strength to protect the world against in this war on terror that's beginning to take place? Where are they? It's this country, nobody else. And where do you go in the world to find a country which at least nominally formed the core of Christendom in the last 200 years? Anyway, the Lord shall make you the head and not the tail. You shall be above only, you shall not be beneath. If you hearken to the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day to do them, you shall not go aside from any of the words to the right hand or to the left, to go after other gods to serve them. Now, there's an interesting expression to this in Numbers, the 6th chapter. I had not noticed before, but it sits there staring off the page at you. Here's where Moses tells Aaron of a blessing. It's really a familiar blessing that he's supposed to pronounce on Israel. Number 6, verse 22. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, On this wise shall you bless the children of Israel, saying unto them, The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And they shall put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. How did they put God's name on the children of Israel? Well, they just did it 3 times in this verse, in these verses. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. 3 times they put God's name on Israel and bless them. It isn't just a question, though, of a phonetic sound. It's a question of an identity, of the reputation, of the authority of God that is carried in his name. It is certainly true that all these blessings have come upon the English people, speaking people of the world in generations past. It's also true that our leadership acknowledged the Bible and the God of the Bible, at least in a generic sense. But one senses a growing shallowness in the acknowledgement of God, even where it exists in our country. And I'm profoundly disturbed by the systematic eradication of God from public life in this country through the courts, in particular. There's a growing shallowness in the acknowledgement of God in some quarters. There's outright denial in other quarters, and a growing vulnerability that almost anyone, I think, could see in this whole long list of wonderful blessings that we have enjoyed for these 230, 240, actually 400 years that we've been here in this country. A growing awareness of the shallowness and the vulnerability in the blessings and where they're going to stay. I was really struck this last week when the President was addressing NATO at the same time the Islamic world was in foment, really against everybody else who wasn't Islamic. The vision of a world divided into 2 camps became ever clearer to me. The war that has begun already is, without any shadow of doubt, a religious war. And it's a war that can never end in an armistice. It's utterly impossible. It's something I don't think we've ever seen in history, at least not in modern history. In modern history, we could fight these wars and kill millions of young men, but eventually we could come to some kind of agreement with our enemy as we did in World War I. Or we could defeat the enemy as we did in World War II and come to a peace and rebuild our enemy as we did graciously after World War II. These wars ended that way. But this war is a religious war. And the faith, the belief systems of the people on the other side of this war will not admit to any acceptance of us or who we are or what we are. Christendom could make peace with Islam. But Islam can never make peace with Christianity, with Christendom. It's not possible. Now, I realize that a lot of what you read today says that, well, radical Islam or fundamentalist Islam cannot do this. But the fact of the matter is that Islam is a lot like Christianity in this regard. There are an awful lot of people who claim to be Muslims who really, they're just nominal. It's really not a part of their core. It's not a part of their being. For the people who really do believe in the words of the prophet, Islam can never make peace with Christendom. It's not possible. And therefore, peace treaties, making agreements with them, can never ever happen. You may be able, for a temporary basis, be able to get a halt in the war, but sooner or later they will be back. And now they have decided to fight this war undercover as terrorists instead of overtly so that you can actually go to battle with them. Now they're fighting the war in a way that really cannot be won. It can only be controlled. It can only be sat on. And how far this will go, one is really hard to say. The thing that really struck me as I was listening to the President's speech and then clicking away on the news channel of what was going on and what people were saying about the development of the Islamist movement throughout the Islamic world. I mean, how many of these people are there now? There are billions of them. And they're out there constantly working in their own population. They actually form as great a danger to their own people as they do to us in many ways. But they're more able to win those battles in those countries. I look at what's happening here, and I couldn't help but harken back. Now, first of all, the events of Daniel 11 and Daniel 12 took place in history. They are historical. I won't take the time to try to go back and outline them for you, because it's something you can do for yourself if it's something that interests you. But after Alexander the Great died, his empire was broken up into 4 parts in that part of the world out in the Middle East. And particularly there were 2 kings in that area. One in Egypt, the Ptolemies, the other Antiochus that were in Syria during this period of time. The Syrian king was called the king of the north. The Ptolemy was called the king of the south. And over a very long period of time, there was all manner of chicanery and finagling that went on back and forth between these 2 warring that went on between these 2 kingdoms, which came and ebbed and flowed right back and forth across Jerusalem, oddly enough. And the story of this has been well documented in history, and I will let you go back and read the story for yourself. But Daniel 11 and 12, oddly, while they outline this story so carefully that one ancient source believed that Daniel had to have been written in 175 B.C., because there was no way he could have foretold the detail of Daniel 11 without having lived through the events that were there. Of course, Daniel did not. He lived in Nebuchadnezzar's time, and this is prophecy. It's a miracle. God gave it to him ahead of time. But the fact of the matter is that when you read Daniel 11 and 12 together, you come to the conclusion that you have dealt with history and you have dealt with prophecy of the very time of the end. And as long as I remember from the time that I was a boy hearing this scripture, at the time of the end, the king of the south will push against the king of the north, and the king of the north will come against him, rolling through the glorious land. The land of Egypt will not escape. Ethiopia will be at his doorsteps. And I was just reading through Daniel 11 and 12 this morning, and thinking again that while I don't want to set any, put any scenarios of prophecy out there before you, what I would suggest is you go back and try to be sure you understand the history of those events, because it is in the history of those events as types of the end that there may be some clues to stuff that may happen yet in the future. And I have never seen anything really quite as dramatic as the development between a king of the south, or a power of the south, and a power of the north, as I see between NATO and the Islamist movement that's taking place not only in Baghdad, but in Saudi Arabia and throughout that part of the world. And make no mistake about it, Saudi Arabia, not necessarily the royal family, but the Saudis are in it up to their armpits. They are definitely involved in all this. So we have that whole thing that we're dealing with. And truth be known, Egypt too, except for the government of Egypt, which is secular, but underneath them there is the strong element of Islamists as well in Egypt. So the whole development that begins to take place, you do have a power of the south and a power of the north that are coming really clearly into focus. And sometimes you never know which one of these events in history will finally bring us to the last events up to the return of Christ. We've wondered about it for a long time. And this will be, I think, a good time as we come down into the events and see them taking place. And as we talk to people on the job, as we talk to our neighbors, as we chat with our friends, to remember this little song that Brent sang to us today. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sins, I will heal their land. And God knows we're going to surely be in need of that.